is not very familiar with flows in general? Because okay, perfect. I can speak a little bit more to that as we go. But the main focus of this will be conquering loops in flows. So first, big thanks to our sponsors, of course. Just a quick introduction to me. I've been in the Salesforce ecosystem so long that the first certification I ever got is no longer available. RIP, Force.com developer. 7 times certified other than that one. I have very strong feelings on cozy versus compact display settings. If you're curious what those are, just give you a little subtle hint there. And that's my LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me if you'd like to. All right, we'll jump right in. So flow loops, when are you wanting to use a flow loop, or when do you need to use a flow loop? You're going to use a loop whenever you have a series of steps to repeat for a group of similar items. So in flow language, a group of similar items is just a collection. You don't necessarily need to create a variable and select that can have multiple records if you are looping through records. In that case, you can just use a get element that returns multiple records. And that's actually what our example will be today. So we're going to loop through a group of similar items because they're all the same type of record. They're all the same object. With a loop, the same series of steps will be performed for each item in your collection in the same order. So the loop will always go step A, B, C, over and over again until it's gone through all of the items in your collection. One really nice thing about loops is you don't need to know how many items there are ahead of time. Your loop will just keep looping until your steps have been performed for every item in your group. So your loop will work just as well for one item as it will for 50 items. It doesn't matter. It'll just keep going until it's gone through all of them. So we're going to do a simple in real life example first, just go through it on the slide deck. I promise I'm not trying to insult your intelligence. I just like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. So let's take a look at how we would make 3 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches if we were using the same methodology as a loop. We would first make the first sandwich. So we would add the peanut butter, then we would add the jelly, we would combine them, we would cut them in half, and we'd add it to the plate. The plate here in my metaphor is comparable to a variable that's just going to hold your items until you're done looping, and then you can do something with those items. So I'll show you that more when we get to the Salesforce example. But once we've gone through all those steps once, we'll loop back to the beginning. And we'll make the second sandwich in exactly the same order. So peanut butter, and then jelly, and then combine, cut, add it to the plate. You get the idea, so we'll loop one more time. The idea here is that you're going to go through the steps the same way every time you make the sandwich. So in real life, you'd probably get like 3 slices of bread, throw all the peanut butter on, 3 slices of bread, throw the jelly on. But in loop methodology, it's always going to repeat those same steps in the same order. And then we won't loop back another time because we're done. We've made 3 sandwiches. We have our plate of 3 sandwiches. All right. Hopefully I didn't insult your intelligence too bad. We'll switch to Salesforce now. So for our use case, personally, I get tired of examples with accounts and contacts. I definitely could have used accounts and contacts. It's exactly the same concept. But we're going to look at a recipe with ingredients. So this is a snapshot of the Salesforce org that we will be looking at. You can see the top section here is our recipe. So our recipe is the parent object. Attached to each recipe is a list of ingredients. So that's going to be our child object. It thankfully doesn't matter for this when you're doing this loop example, whether it's a master detail relationship or a lookup relationship, doesn't matter. As long as you have a parent-child, same thing. So our goal with our flow that's going to have a loop in it is we want to get a list of all of our ingredients from that related list into one text area. So we want to concatenate all of those ingredients into one long list. And we'll separate them with semicolons so that it's more readable. So we'll take a closer look at that ingredients related list. The only field that we really care about here in our loop is the display name with one asterisk. We're going to put them in the same order that I'm showing here in the related list. So this is literally just a number field called order, and I've typed in the order that I want them to show up. This happens to be the order that you use these ingredients in the recipe. But we're going to maintain the same order in the loop. So that's kind of an important note for how we want to sort. So just to kind of skip ahead to what this should look like when we're done, our goal is to get this list of ingredients in a semicolon separated list, just like that. All right, so kind of jumping back to my sandwich visual, let's do a visual of what we're going to do with this actual loop. First, the loop is going to grab the display name of that first ingredient, which happens to be 3 eggs. Then we're going to add literally just a semicolon and a space so that we have a little separator between all the ingredients. And then we're going to add that to a variable, and that variable is just going to hold all of our ingredients as we update that list until we have all of them on there, and then we can do something with it at the end. So after we do the first ingredient, we'll loop back to the beginning. We'll grab the display name of the second ingredient, again add that semicolon and space, and add that text to our variable, and so on. I won't bore you with every single one here. So our plan to do this, I have a button here. Technically, I have an action here that is calling a screen flow. So we're just going to work on that screen flow, and so that at the end we can click on this populate ingredients button, and it should throw our ingredients list in this field here. All right, so let's jump to the org. So we are looking at the Salesforce org. Right now, the button doesn't do much. Literally, all it's doing is saying, well, I know what recipe ID you're on, but that's it. So let's open up setup and make it a lot smarter. All right, so I've got my screen flow. Hopefully just one version. Yeah, perfect. I'm going to just delete that under construction screen that you just saw. And let's take a look at what I've got so far, which is very little. Literally all I have is a text variable called record ID. This has nothing to do with loops, but I think it's a good tip just to know about launching flows from a button on your page. If you name your text variable exactly this, record ID, and make it available for input, when you launch that flow from your page, Salesforce knows to just send you that record ID. It's just the magic of literally this text string. So that's all that's doing. But other than that, we've got a pretty blank canvas here. All right, so the first thing we want to do is get all of the ingredients that is attached to this recipe. So we'll add a get element. Oh, I'm going to type with one hand. I didn't think about that. And we'll get ingredients. So the object we care about is obviously ingredients. And the only filter we need is we want to make sure that these ingredients that we're getting are attached to the recipe of the record that we're looking at. So the recipe ID here should be equal to that record ID magic variable. All right, and then I mentioned there's a particular sort we want. So we do want these sorted ascending. And the field that we want to sort by on the ingredient object is just called order. We definitely want all the records, not just the first one. And we can just leave this as automatically store all fields. Sorry, I meant to say this earlier. I asked, and all of the sessions are recorded, so don't feel like you have to take a million notes. You certainly can. But you can grab all of this on the YouTube video later if you want an example to refer to. I know that's how I learn best, so just FYI. All right, so that's all we need for our get ingredients element. Next, we could create a loop, but first I'm going to create that variable. Remember I mentioned we need a variable kind of like that plate that held our sandwiches. We just need a variable to hold our ingredient list as we're making it. So let me create a new variable. I'm just going to call it ingredient list. I'm very impressed with my one-handed typing, I have to tell you. We'll make it just data type text, and that's all we need. Now we will add our loop. So I'll add a loop element. I always, of course you can name your elements whatever you want, but I always like to say what I'm looping through, so we're going to loop through our ingredients. So the collection variable, like I mentioned, we didn't actually create a separate variable, but that get ingredients is a collection variable, so we can just choose that for our collection variable, and we want to go first to last. I always think the loop element is like deceptively simple, because the loop itself is not really where the magic happens. This is where the magic happens. So in this for each, this is where we're going to add those steps that are always going to happen in the same order. So let's add our first step. We're going to do an assignment. I'm going to call this assign display name. Remember, that's just the name of the field we care about on ingredients to our variable. I always have a hard time remembering which thing goes on the left side and which thing goes on the right side. The left side is going to get the variable that you're adding to, and the right side is going to be what you're adding to it. So on the left side, we're going to choose that ingredient list variable that we just created. Critically, we're going to change equals to add. If we make this equals, every time it looped, it would just overwrite the latest ingredient. It would overwrite the old ingredient with the latest ingredient. So we want to add to that list every time it loops rather than overwriting it. And then this part is very specific to flows, and it's a little bit tricky the first time you see it, in my opinion. What we want to find here is we want to grab the display name of whatever ingredient record we are currently on. Because remember, we're going to loop through a whole bunch of ingredient records. So what we need to scroll down to is the current item from loop. And notice it even tells us this is going to be an ingredient record, which is expected. So once I click on the current item from loop, then it knows, OK, so you just want whatever ingredient we're currently looking at, grab whatever field you want. So now I can say I want the display name. All right. Full disclosure, I'm going to do this in a not optimized way because I think it's a little easier to understand. I'll tell you how to optimize it afterwards. So for the second step, it's just another assignment. And here we're going to add the semicolon and the space. Semicolon and space to our same variable. So again, the left side gets the thing that you are adding to, which is our ingredient list variable again. Again, we want to hit add instead of equals so we don't overwrite it. And then this is just literal text that we're adding, so we can literally just type it in, semicolon, space. That's it. OK, before I forget, you can technically do both of those in one assignment. So if you ever enter FlowFest and they tell you that you can steal a competitor's win by using fewer elements, which they told us an hour before FlowFest, just so you know. But anyway, you could actually just add that semicolon right here in the same one. And thankfully, flows are smart enough to respect the order of your assignments. So it will go down the list one by one, which is really nice. And I think it's actually a recent addition. But we're going to keep it as two separate ones just because I think it's a little bit easier to understand the order of steps. All right, so in theory, this would fully populate our ingredient list. The last thing that we need to do is just add that ingredient list to the recipe object itself. So I'm going to add one more element, an update. And we will update the recipe. Let's specify conditions to say which recipe we want to update. Again, this will just be the recipe ID of whatever that magic record ID variable is. And the field we want to update is just called ingredients. And the value we want to update it with is that ingredient list variable. All right. And then I really hate the out-of-the-box success screen, so I'm just going to create my own real fast. It's all caps. It yells at you. It's just a lot, you know? I say that, and then I'm going to put an exclamation mark on mine, so I guess I'm not much better. All right. If I was a better admin, we would debug this, but let's just go test it in production because you only live once. Let me refresh just to make sure. All right, populate ingredients. We got the success screen. That's a good sign. And there it is, our ingredient list. So let's go test this on a couple other recipes just to make sure I didn't do some trickery on you. All right, works on cookies, but does it work on macaroni and cheese? Awesome. All right. Depending on time, I can show you how to get rid of the ending semicolon. It really has nothing to do with loops, but I'm anal, and that would drive me crazy. So, all right, let me get back to the slide deck for now, though. Last text-heavy slide, I promise. If you need to get, create, update, or delete records, you never want to do that inside of a loop. Salesforce will tell you that's bad practice, which means a million things. The reason that's bad practice is you can easily hit what's called DML limits. So if you notice, that's why we didn't run an update on the recipe inside our loop. We actually technically could have, right? Every time we added an ingredient to our list, we could have updated the recipe with that. But that would have been like 8 updates of the recipe for, you know, one recipe with 8 different ingredients. Instead, you want to, in this case, populate a variable with all of those and then update your recipe once you have your variable totally populated. So you'll read that, you know, never do this stuff in loops. That's why. Just a heads up, like I said, I'm an example person and I like to look at many different examples. So I just wanted to let you know, Salesforce documentation on loops features an example with a decision element inside, which is totally valid and good practice if you need to. So that's worth a look, and I'll link you to a QR code at the end here. And then just in case I forgot to say it, I wanted to let you know that the recording of this will be available, so stay tuned on the Mile High Dreaming YouTube channel. Would the formula for killing that final semicolon be helpful for anybody, or we don't really care? Yes, okay. We'll do that real quick. All right, so what I would do is create a new formula. I had a really long name for this called ingredient list minus final semicolon, but I'm typing one-handed, so this is going to be called formula. All right, and the way that I would do this, I'm sure there's, like anything, many different ways to do this, but you can insert the ingredient list, and you want to use a combination of 2 different functions. The first function you want to use is the left function, which just says, give me the left characters in a particular text until the number of characters that I tell you. So that would be the first part. But we don't have an exact number we can enter, right? We don't know that it'll be, you know, give me 6 or whatever. So the next thing we need to do is find the length of this same variable. So we would also use the length function. And then we want to return the leftmost characters in the ingredient list minus 2, because we want to kill that ending space and that ending semicolon. And I always get my parentheses wrong on this, which is why I'm totally cheating. Oh, it also would help if I didn't literally write the word text in there. There we go. Okay, I think that's right, but Salesforce will tell us no. Thank you. You're my hero. Perfect. Okay, so the formula is going to be calculated at the time you use it. So as long as we use the formula at the very end, the ingredient list will be fully populated and it'll kill that final semicolon in space. So instead of setting the ingredients field to our ingredient list, we would set it to this formula instead. So let's test that. All right, and that kills our last little semicolon in space. Cool, let me hit this. That's my LinkedIn. If you have any questions about flows or whatever, feel free to connect with me. I don't check it a whole lot, but I'll try to make a point to. And then that's that Salesforce documentation example, if you'd like to get it. Any questions I can answer for folks? Yeah.
Do you think there's merit in future-proofing a flow by doing that second assignment element in case you do have to do a second, like, you know, you're adding an ingredient and the amount in a different way, or you have them as separate fields that way? Because assignment elements don't let you reorder stuff. So if your semicolon's always going to be the last thing, is there merit in having it as a second assignment as opposed to just putting it all into one?
Oh, good question. Yeah, and it doesn't hurt anything having it in two different, like it won't hurt your performance. Some people are just really anal about as few elements as possible. So yeah, I think that's totally fair, and it definitely won't hurt anything. You bring up a good point, though. In practice, you know, if you have a recipe, or let's say you're using this on accounts and contacts, and you add a new ingredient, using this as a screen flow with a button is not necessarily the best way. It was the easiest way to demonstrate loops. But you would probably want a, what's it called, record-triggered flow, so that every time an ingredient is added, it updates that list. The little trick there is you also want to remember delete, because if they kill one, you still want to update that list as well. Okay, thank you again so much for getting up at 8 a.m. I appreciate it.